Hello and welcome back to Live from Paris. I'm Annette Young. It's 1:30 p.m. here in the French capital. Let's take a look at what's making news this hour. And for the first time in 8 years, Iran's Supreme Leader leads Friday prayers in the capital, calling for national unity. This in a bid to quell anger after the military accidentally shot down a passenger plane last week. Also, dozens of civilians are killed in Syria's Idlib provinces. Aid workers say the regime and its backer Russia resumed strikes just days after a ceasefire went into effect. Moscow is denying the allegation. And the US Senate turns into a courtroom with its politicians into jurors. The impeachment trial against President Donald Trump begins. He's charged with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Trump dismissing the proceedings as a hoax. But we begin in Iran, where the country's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei led Friday prayers in the capital, Tehran. It's the first time he's done so in 8 years. This coming in the wake of widespread angry protests over the Ukrainian passenger plane being shot down by the Iranian military last week. Thousands listening as the Ayatollah said the protests were overshadowing the assassination of the Iranian top military commander, Qasem Soleimani, by a US drone strike earlier in the month. He also called for national unity. I spoke earlier to our correspondent in Tehran, Reza Sayeh.
Obviously, many people eager to see what he would focus on in his sermon, what kind of tone he would deliver in his sermon. Obviously, Iran facing a number of issues, multiple crises with a spiraling economy, the exchange of military strikes recently with the U.S. anti-government protests, the recent U.S. assassination of their top military commander, Qasem Soleimani, a couple of weeks ago, and last week's accidental downing of a Ukrainian airliner that killed 176 people. What would the Supreme Leader focus on? He made it clear very early on in his speech that he would focus on a fierce criticism of the United States and Washington's policy in the region. The Supreme Leader blaming much of the turmoil in the region, in Iran, on U.S. policy in the region, accusing the U.S. Of creating ISIS in the region in order to destabilize Iran, accusing the U.S. of terrorism in their assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the top Iranian military general, and praising the Revolutionary Guard's response. The Supreme Leader telling the largely conservative gathering at Friday prayers that the Islamic Revolution was built on resistance, calling on the country to continue to resist what he called Iran's, the U.S.'s oppressive policy in the region. One of the things that many people, not just here in Iran, but around the world, were eager to see is how would he address the tragedy of the Ukrainian airliner that was downed by the Iranian military last week. About 40 minutes into the speech, the Supreme Leader finally addressed that tragedy, calling it a tragedy, but he also said it was an incident that the U.S. celebrated because in the U.S.'s eyes, according to the Supreme Leader, this would destabilize Iran. In situations like this, when Iran is facing a crisis, we've seen in the past the Supreme Leader address Friday prayers. He usually calls for unity, solidarity. He's doing that now again.
Reza, given the anger that we've seen in the last few days, what is the mood like currently in the country?
It's not a good mood, Annette. People are increasingly angry, they're frustrated, and it's been going on for a while, especially with their day-to-day life, with the spiraling economy. And now with the recent incidents, the threat of war with the U.S., again, the downing of the Ukrainian airliner, people are losing patience, they're losing hope. And I think there's a great need here for the people to be reassured, to find some sort of hope. And I think that's why many observers say the Supreme Leader came out and spoke today, did his speech, will his sermon reassure people? Will it create unity? Will it create solidarity? I think the fact that he focused on the U.S. and his fierce criticism of Washington's policy will lead many people to say that that's not what this country needed at the moment. But again, the Islamic Revolution for 4 decades now, that's been one of the pillars just to stand up against what they call U.S. imperialism and laying the blame of what's happening here in Iran on the U.S. policy. And we heard that again from the Supreme Leader today.
And that was our Tehran correspondent Reza Sayan. Now joining me in the studio is Majid Golpur, a Iranian specialist at ULB in Belgium. Thank you for coming in, Majid. What should we take away from the Ayatollah's sermon today?
You know, according to his view, we cannot be in opposition with U.S. We must hate U.S. And whatever, as your reporter bring as information about all the very important files, economical, geopolitical, and also domestic problem we have in Iran, he brought any solution. Just a radical position about what we must do as the radical, we can say, leader or community without any solution.
So will it be enough to soothe public anger, given, as you're saying, that he's just basically speaking to the radical elements of Iranian society?
Absolutely not. I really believe the polarization of Iranian society is much more than yesterday. And even, I think, between the Iranian, we can say, social class, the middle class, upper class, even the people that are in opposition, even if they have any illusion about the vision of Ayatollah Khamenei, but they could expect a kind of compromise, at least on words. But we couldn't find this compromise. So
as a result, are those protests likely to continue?
It's very difficult to answer you, because I think with the today lecture of Ayatollah Khamenei, the price of protestation become very expensive, very high level. And for the social civil society, who they are not armed, they are not organized, they have any resource in a political international level, I think that they are just the citizens. They must really rethink 2 times about their intervention. We will have a very narrow and very difficult time, but we have some open window of opportunity. I don't know if you have time to explain a little bit about this.
Yes, please do.
You know, according to the situation we face today, all the doors for the so-called elected institution is closed now. Ayatollah Khamenei said, I'm the one who know everything. I'm the most knowledgeable, the most powerful, and the full power is with me. Even he mentioned Allah is with him. And I think for a holy man, so-called holy man, to be so angry, so hateful, and to be so, we can say, anxious about everything, this is not good sign. And in other hand, he said, we can also negotiate. The intuition I have in my analysis, I think perhaps he opened some door for the, we can call it secret diplomacy, or parallel
back channel.
Yes, back channel. And perhaps with a very bad lecture of today, he opened without introducing Ayatollah Rouhani or Mr. Zarif, he opened the door for some back channel negotiation with the, especially I hope with the European countries.
Majid Golpur, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
And staying in the region, and dozens of civilians have been killed by airstrikes in Idlib, Syria's last opposition-held province in the last 48 hours. Those attacks being carried out by the Syrian Air Force and its Russian allies have prompted hundreds of thousands of people to flee the region. UN officials estimating that figure is somewhere around 350,000, many of them women and children. Monty Francis has more.
Syrian artillery and Russian jets in an all-out assault by Bashar al-Assad's forces in northwest Syria. The attacks flattened buildings south of Aleppo where rescuers pulled a small girl from the rubble, covered in dust, but alive. Despite denials from Russia, human rights groups report that Russian and Syrian forces resumed bombing civilian areas, destroying hospitals and schools, even though a ceasefire was supposed to go into effect on January 12th. Villages are in ruins and children and rescue workers are among the dead. The United Nations says 350,000 Syrians have fled their homes since December to escape the violence.
We are now leaving because of the bombardments. We have loaded our belongings, and we don't know where we will go.
The Russian-backed offensive is moving closer to more heavily populated areas of Idlib, Syria's last opposition-held province, and home to 3 million people. The UN says the hundreds of thousands of Syrians seeking refuge at the Turkish border are in the middle of a growing humanitarian crisis, with families in makeshift camps running short of food and water.
For just the third time in America's history, the Senate's chamber has been transformed into a court of impeachment. It will ultimately determine if indeed Donald Trump should be removed from office. He is facing 2 articles of impeachment charged with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. All 100 senators were sworn in as jurors, presided over by Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts. In the meantime, the Government Accountability Office has released a report concluding the White House broke the law when it withheld aid to Ukraine. This following new evidence about the president's effort to pressure Ukraine into investigating his political rival. Catherine Viette has more.
Fresh headaches for Donald Trump after a government watchdog agency said the White House broke the law when it withheld aid to Ukraine. The House Speaker was quick to seize on the report by the Government Accountability Office.
Today, the Government Accounting Office confirmed that the president's actions at the center of our impeachment articles, withholding congressionally approved military aid from Ukraine, was illegal. The OMB, the White House, the administration broke the law.
This as more evidence comes to light about Donald Trump's dealings in Ukraine. House Democrats have released dozens of pages of documents and text messages, including a handwritten note by Lev Parnas, a close associate of Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney. The note on Ritz-Carlton stationery reads, "Get Zelensky to announce that the Biden case will be investigated." Speaking to U.S. media, Parnas confirmed Trump's involvement.
President Trump knew exactly what was going on. He was aware of all my movements. I wouldn't do anything without the consent of Rudy Giuliani or the president.
Additionally, a series of text messages shed light on secret efforts to remove the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. In an exchange between Parnas and Ukrainian prosecutor Yuri Lutsenko, Lutsenko writes, "And here you can't even get rid of one female fool." Parnas replies, "She's not a simple fool, trust me, but she's not getting away." With the discovery of this new information, the Ukrainian authorities have announced they've opened a criminal investigation into whether the former U.S. ambassador was spied on.
Ukraine cannot ignore such a legal fact on its territory.
It's very intimidating.
During testimony to Congress in October, Yovanovitch said she feared for her safety and felt personally threatened by statements from Trump.
Here in France, French filmmaker Christophe Rougier has been charged over accusations that he sexually assaulted actress Adèle Haenel when she was a minor. The actress, now 31, lodging a formal complaint against the filmmaker last November, this after accusing him in an interview of sexually harassing her when she was aged between 12 and 15. Her accusations stunning the French film industry, which has been slower than Hollywood to react to the Me Too movement, turning the spotlight on sexual abuse in the sector. In the meantime, the number of sexual assault cases reported to police in France has risen by 12% in 2019. More than 54,000 sex crimes were reported in the last 12 months. Officials saying that this is the result of improved police service being provided to victims seeking assistance. To Malta now, where the country's new Prime Minister Robert Abela was sworn in on Monday and appointing his new cabinet on Wednesday. Many are hoping that the new blood in the government will be an opportunity for the country to heal the divisions caused by the murder of anti-corruption journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia 2 years ago. Yet protesters continue to demand justice in the investigation around her death. Catherine Bennett reports.
It's been over 2 years since the Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia was murdered. Monthly vigils at the Great Siege Memorial in the country's capital Valletta continue. Protesters are waiting to see if new Prime Minister Robert Abela handles the investigation into Caruana Galizia's death better than his predecessor.
It all depends on whether the new Prime Minister Robert Abela passes the tests that now lie before him. He has to do the things that the Prime Minister before him, Joseph Muscat, was unwilling or unable to do, perhaps because of blackmail or self-incrimination.
Caruana Galizia was an investigative anti-corruption journalist who broke stories about government corruption the year before her death. She was assassinated with a car bomb in October 2017. Her murder sparked a political crisis. The previous Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat, was forced out by weeks of protest over accusations he interfered in the police investigation. One of Robert Abela's first actions as Prime Minister was to order workers not to clear the makeshift memorial. Under Muscat, the candles and flowers were regularly removed, angering activists and Caruana Galizia's family.
And it was a sound that's not been heard for months in many parts of southern Australia, that of course being rain. Many Australians expressing relief as the states of Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria recorded heavy rainfalls. It comes as the country's been fighting bushfires since last September. Those massive blazes killing 29 people, millions of animals, while destroying more than 2,500 homes and razing an area roughly a third of the size of Germany. Officials saying the rain will not extinguish all the fires, but certainly will greatly help with containing them. And on the other side of the equator, here in the northern hemisphere, as winter weather brings freezing temperatures in the Balkans, cities in the region have become shrouded in toxic smog. The poor are being forced to light fires at home for heating, thus fueling a major pollution crisis. In recent weeks, Belgrade, Sarajevo, Skopje and Pristina have been ranked among the world's top 10 most polluted cities.
The smog in Sarajevo is so thick it's hard to see and even harder to breathe.
We can hardly catch our breath when we go out. It's especially hard for people with heart and lung problems. Sometimes you can't even walk on the street. Even with a scarf on, we are suffocating.
Sarajevo, along with Balkan capitals Belgrade and Pristina, have been ranked among the world's top 10 most polluted major cities in recent weeks. A wintertime crisis fueled by nearby coal plants and by 60% of the region's population, which uses coal or firewood to heat their homes. A recent UN report found that air pollution is to blame for 20% of premature deaths in more than a dozen Western Balkan cities. Protests have erupted across the region to demand that governments make clean energy more accessible and to tighten regulations on emissions.
We lose 5,500 lives every year in Bosnia. Every citizen suffers because of this air. Everyone suffers except politicians. Politicians ignore it.
One answer would be for cleaner heating options at home, but it's a solution many cannot afford in a region where wages average about €500 a month.
And with almost 6 months to go until the 2020 Summer Olympic Games in Tokyo, organisers have installed a giant set of Olympic rings on the city's waterfront. The 5 multicoloured steel rings measuring more than 32 metres wide and 15 metres high. It's all part of efforts by city officials to help build a festive atmosphere, with organisers next week holding an official unveiling ceremony on the 24th of January, which will be marking exactly 6 months before the opening ceremony. And just keep in mind how quickly the last 6 months have gone. Now, a reminder of what's making news this hour, and for the first time in 8 years, Iran's supreme leader leads Friday prayers in the capital, calling for national unity. This in a bid to quell public anger after the Iranian military accidentally shot down a passenger plane last week. Also, dozens of civilians are killed in Syria's Idlib provinces. Aid workers say the regime in its back of Russia resumed strikes just days after a ceasefire went into effect. Moscow has denied the allegation. And the US Senate has turned into a courtroom, its politicians into jurors. The impeachment trial against President Donald Trump begins. He's charged with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. Trump dismissing the proceedings as a hoax.